About myself. My name is Emily Turner, and I'm 32 years old. I was born and raised in Millfield, a small town nestled in the heart of Ohio that's as quiet as it is unassuming. If you've ever spent time in one of those towns where everybody knows everybody and stories seem to echo through the generations, then you'll know the feeling of Millfield. It's a place where the bakery and hardware store have been in the same spot for decades, where the old school bell still rings every Monday morning, and where people measure time by the shifting of the seasons and the growth of their gardens. I grew up the only child of Martha and Henry Turner. My parents ran a modest bookstore on Main Street, Turner's Books and Gifts, a cozy little shop crammed with novels, local histories, and the scent of old paper. It wasn't glamorous, but to me, it was paradise. My childhood memories unfold between the shelves, afternoons hiding with a flashlight and a stack of mystery novels, early mornings helping my dad stack boxes, evenings listening to my mom share stories with customers as they sipped her homemade lemonade. Looking back, I realize how much those days shaped the person I became. My parents never had much, but they had kindness, humor, and a fierce pride in honesty and hard work. My mother used to say that real wealth is the respect you earn, not the money you keep. Those words became something of a compass for me, especially during moments of uncertainty later on. They didn't push me to be perfect, but they showed me the value of doing my best, even when nobody was watching. If you'd known me as a child, you'd have met a curious, slightly awkward girl with an insatiable love for books and a habit of questioning everything, from why the willow tree drooped by the river to why some neighbors kept secrets while others wore their hearts on their sleeves. I was sensitive, introspective, and a little too empathetic for my own good, someone who felt other people's hurts as keenly as my own. I think that's why I sometimes struggled to fit in at school. I couldn't be bothered to follow the latest trends, and I'd rather spend an afternoon writing in my journal than at a sleepover. Dreams came early for me. Sometimes they were small, to read every book in my parents' store, to make my own perfect lemon pie, or to explore the patches of woods just outside town. Sometimes they were bigger, like heading to college in Columbus or starting a business someday. But the biggest dream I held, and the one that kept me going during difficult days, was to build a home of my own, one filled with laughter, understanding, and a love that lasted. As a teenager, I worked part-time at the bookstore and babysat for neighbors. I learned how to balance receipts, handle difficult customers, and make decisions under pressure. I also learned about resilience, how businesses weather hard winters, how my parents supported each other when sales were slow, and how they found hope in little triumphs, like a new customer or a glowing review in the local newspaper. My upbringing gave me a deep sense of belonging, but also, I admit, a certain naivety about the world's harshness. I truly believed that goodness would always be enough, that if you loved hard and worked honestly, the world would reward you in turn. Of course, life had other lessons in store, and it took me far from Millfield in ways I never expected. But before all that happened, I was simply Emily, a dreamer, a daughter, and a girl from a quiet corner of Ohio, holding tight to her hopes for the future. First love and early marriage. If I close my eyes, I can still remember the sweet, sunlit afternoons when Daniel Mason and I first became friends. He was a year older, with an easy smile and a wild streak of chestnut hair that never quite did what he wanted. We grew up only a few blocks apart. His family ran the local hardware store, and we first met long before love was even a question. In Millfield, childhood friendships have a way of following us quietly into adulthood, and ours was no exception. The truth is, Daniel was always there. He was the boy who carried my backpack when I broke my wrist learning to ride a bike, the teenager who helped me hang lights in the bookstore at Christmas, the young man I'd see from my bedroom window, tinkering with old engines or practicing his baseball swing. We were inseparable for years, sharing secrets, attending the same schools, knowing each other's families and all their quirks by heart. Ours was the kind of friendship that felt almost inevitable, like something woven into the fabric of the town itself. By the time we finished high school, our friendship had quietly grown into something more. There was no big moment, just 1,000 small ones. A hand lingering a little too long, laughter that softened into silence, the safe warmth of a shoulder to cry on. When he first told me he loved me, it was raining, and we were huddled under the awning of Turner's Books and Gifts above the flickering neon sign. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic, just honest and true, and I said yes before he could even finish his sentence. Daniel made me believe in the gentle kind of love, the sort you don't have to chase or prove. He was patient in the ways I was restless, steady where I was emotional. His parents, Tom and Margaret Mason, were pillars of the community, cordial, polite, a little severe in private, but always welcoming on holidays. I was young. I saw only the good intentions, not the undercurrent of expectation and pride that ran through their family. A year after college, Daniel proposed in the quietest way possible, just us and a secondhand ring, over coffee and blueberry muffins in the park where we'd gone as kids. We married that spring, surrounded by lifelong friends in the scent of wildflowers. My parents beamed with pride and wiped away tears as I walked down the aisle, believing, as I did, that happiness was only just beginning. In those early months of marriage, I invested every part of myself into our shared life. I worked long hours at the bookstore and helped Daniel's family at the hardware store on weekends. We moved into a small apartment above his family's shop, a walk-up with squeaky floors and faded wallpaper. But to me, it felt like the world's best castle. Yet even then, I sometimes caught the glint of something guarded in Margaret's eyes, a subtle tension during family meals, a dismissive remark about how book people are dreamers, not doers. Daniel always brushed it off, assuring me I was loved and accepted, and I wanted so desperately to believe him, to prove I was worthy of their respect and his devotion. Those early days shimmer in my memory, like a picture just slightly out of focus, filled with promise, yes, but already tinged with shadows I refused to name. At the time, all I felt was gratitude for my gentle husband, for the chance to join a new family, and for the belief that our love would weather whatever came next. The tragedy of being wrongfully accused and cast out. I sometimes think there are moments in life when the world shifts beneath our feet, and everything we thought we knew about love, about ourselves, about the people closest to us, falls away like mist. For me, it wasn't a dramatic crash, but a silent unraveling, a slow tightening of invisible threads until, one day, I found I couldn't breathe. It started with whispers. At first, I barely noticed them. There were small, strange things at Daniel's family hardware store. A missing invoice, a drawer left unlocked, a tally that seemed off. Each time, Margaret, my mother-in-law, would sigh with that familiar note of disappointment, barely glancing at me as she set about righting whatever had gone wrong. Lisa, Daniel's older sister, had a way of looking through me, smiling just a beat too late, as if I were some balancing act she found amusing but unnecessary. I tried to ignore it. Daniel told me not to worry, that his mother had always been particular, that Lisa was just intense. I tried to brush off the warning bells, telling myself I was making mountains out of molehills, that everything was fine. Marriage, after all, isn't just about love. It's about letting yourself belong, about trusting the place you've chosen, even when it starts to feel less familiar. The day the audit books first went missing, I was 8 weeks pregnant. Daniel and I hadn't told anyone yet, not even my parents. I was exhausted all the time, from work, from too many nerves, fluctuating between nausea and elation, already dreaming of nursery colors and wondering if I'd be a good mother. I remember standing at the counter with Margaret, helping close for the evening, when she asked to see the month's cash logs. I handed her the folder from beneath the register, her lips pursed as she spitballed calculations in her head. "Strange," she said, flipping pages with sharp, deliberate hands. "Something's off. I'll have to look into this." I tried, awkwardly, to offer help, but she waved me off and left the room. That night, Daniel was quiet over dinner. I tried to share my excitement about our secret, a new life, a fresh start, but he stared into his mashed potatoes, brow furrowed. "Mom and Lisa say the books don't add up," he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "Did you maybe forget to ring something up, Em?" It was innocent, almost loving, the way he phrased it. Gentle Daniel, trying not to accuse, but the implication was there, cool and stinging. I tried to laugh it away. "If I did, it wasn't on purpose," I replied. "Numbers were never my strong suit, but you know I'd never—" He nodded, but he didn't smile. That week, it got worse. Margaret came to our apartment door one evening, her face grave. She held up a stack of receipts, crisp and damning. "Emily," she began, "there's money missing from the register. I've checked everything 3 times. These are your shifts. Can you explain this?" Lisa hovered behind her, arms folded. "It's clear what happened. Just admit it," she said, her voice flat. "If you needed the money, you should have come to us." Everything inside me twisted. I tried to protest, but the words fell flat. The receipts didn't add up. The numbers sang their false song. And the more I spoke, the guiltier I sounded. Daniel listened from the doorway, arms crossed, face shuttered. "Did you take it, Em?" was all he said. "No," I said, the word clawing its way out of my throat. "Why would I? Daniel's my husband. This is my family, too." But my voice sounded weak, even to my own ears. Margaret shook her head, as if disappointed in a child. "I can't have this. Not in my house," she said. "You need to leave until you can come clean. Maybe time apart will help you see things more clearly." Suddenly, I was 15 again. Caught in a lie I hadn't told. Accused of things I didn't understand. I looked at Daniel, pleading, but he turned away. "Maybe you should go, Emily," he whispered. I packed a suitcase with shaking hands. Barely time to grab the essentials. My wedding ring felt heavier than ever, a leaden circle on my finger, as I stuffed clothing into my old college duffel bag. No one offered to help. Margaret stood in the hallway, impassive. Lisa watched from the kitchen, face blank. Only Daniel lingered, uncertain, by the doorway. He didn't say he loved me. He didn't even say goodbye. He just looked up at the ceiling as if waiting for this scene to end and his real life to resume. Outside, the air was cold and smelled of rain. I stood on the curb for a moment, dazed, watching as the lights clicked off in the apartment above the shop. I wanted to believe this was some temporary insanity, a misunderstanding that would blow over, that Daniel would call me back in a few minutes, drive to find me, beg me to come home. But the minutes stretched into hours. The streets grew quiet, and I realized with a hollow ache that I was truly alone. What hurt the most wasn't the accusation itself, but how quickly everyone accepted it. No presumption of innocence, no effort to listen, just a communal decision that somehow the new wife, the book girl from Main Street, was the obvious answer to a missing line item on a ledger. I replayed every family dinner, every awkward compliment from Margaret, every backhanded remark from Lisa, and saw them anew. Coded tests I never noticed, silent judgments stacking up, a debt I never knew I'd incurred. I spent the first night in a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the neon sign flickered outside my window all night. I wept until my eyes ached. All the dreams I had spun, of motherhood, of mending old wounds, of building something lasting, collapsed in on themselves, sharp and choking. I called my parents, my voice barely more than a whisper, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. I need to stay in Columbus for a while, I lied. Just working things out. My mother's worry traveled down the line like static. You know you can always come home, Em, she said. But I couldn't bear the idea of showing up at their door. Every insecurity laid bare. Proof that I had failed. Sleep was impossible. My mind played vicious games with me. Maybe I had forgotten to sign something. Maybe I had made an honest mistake. Maybe, somehow, Margaret was right. I scoured my memories for any sign I had caused all this, some small slip that explained the unraveling. But I found nothing except the cold certainty of betrayal and shame. In the days that followed, I gave in to numbness. The world outside was hard and unwelcoming. I found a room for rent in a noisy Columbus neighborhood, answering ads and knocking on doors with the kind of desperation I'd never known. I pawned my grandmother's bracelet, scraped every bit of savings I had, and looked for work, anything to pay the next week's rent. I picked up shifts at bakeries and coffee shops, sometimes working double just to keep my mind from spiraling. Word got back to Millfield quickly. In small towns, secrets are currency, and mine was easy to spend. I'd become another cautionary tale, another whispered story, traded over grocery counters and in the pews at Sunday service. All I could do was steel myself and promise each morning as I forced myself out of bed that I would survive this. Not for Daniel, not for Margaret, not even for the town that had turned away, but for the small flicker of life growing inside me. The one hope I wouldn't let anyone steal. Pregnancy became a lonely affair. The doctor's office was crowded, impersonal, a far cry from the family I had imagined surrounding me. I filled out forms alone, watched fat drops of rain slide down waiting room windows, counted kicks, and prayed. Sometimes, in the quiet moments after midnight, I would put a hand to my belly and whisper my secrets to the child inside. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But we're going to make it, somehow. Despite everything, small kindnesses found me. There was Mrs. Lopez, an elderly woman in my building who lent me a battered sewing kit so I could hem borrowed pants for my ever-growing stomach. There was Carol, the night shift supervisor at the bakery, who never asked why my eyes were red in the mornings, who would slip a chocolate croissant into my bag when no one was looking. Sometimes it was just a smile from a stranger, a gentle word, a moment's warmth that tethered me to the world. But every victory, every job offer or paycheck was chased back by the shadow of accusation. I kept every receipt now, tracked every cent, double-checked every lock and tally. It changed me. I became more cautious, more private. When people asked about Daniel, about the life I'd left behind, I told them little, if anything at all. It didn't work out, I'd say. Or, life got complicated. I refused to let the bitterness eat me alive, but it stayed with me. familiar as breath, sharp as vinegar. On my darkest days, I wondered if I should return to Millfield, stand my ground, and force the truth into the open. I would draft long, angry letters in my mind, addressed to Daniel, to Margaret, to Lisa, demanding justice, demanding an apology. But I always tore them up. Part of me was terrified that my own voice, too, would be dismissed, that no one would listen, that their word would always carry more weight than mine. I found work that steadied me, eventually, work that let me save, plan, and breathe. I learned new skills, took business classes at night when my son slept, determined that if I could not clear my name, I could at least build something that was entirely, fiercely my own. And yet, I could not shake the hurt. In rare moments, when the world was quiet and the loneliness pressed too close, I let myself remember Daniel, not as he was at the end, cold and uncertain, but as the boy who carried my backpack and danced with me in the rain. There was grief, yes, but there was also the raw hope that one day the truth might come out, that one day I might walk into that town, not as a victim or a ghost, but as a woman who had survived. When I finally found the courage to look back at the person I had been, I saw a girl desperate for belonging, too trusting of love, too willing to give second chances. I grieved her loss, but I honored her, too, for loving without limits and for surviving the ruin that followed. Because in the ashes of that downfall, something new began to grow. Not forgiveness, not at first, but a resolve deep as bone. I would create a life for myself and for my child that no accusation, no darkness could ever take away. And that, I promised myself, was how this story would change. Not with a single door slamming shut in my face, but with a dozen new doors opening, one tenuous day at a time. Rising from rock bottom in a new city arriving in Columbus was like stepping onto another planet, not because it was truly foreign, but because in those first days, I moved through the city in a fog of grief, adrenaline, and shame. I pulled my old duffel higher on my shoulder, clutching at the hope that anonymity could be a shield. No one here knew what I'd left behind in Millfield. No whispering neighbors, no judgmental glances at the grocery store, no one watching to see if I failed or begged for forgiveness. I wasn't Emily, the bookshop girl, or the hardware store wife. I was just another lost soul looking for a place to land. The first place I stayed in Columbus was barely more than a room in a sublet off Livingston Avenue. My landlord was a grad student named Max, who seemed permanently exhausted and rarely remembered my name. The single-pane windows let in the winter drafts, and the radiator woke me with clangs and groans, but it felt safer than the silence of Millfield. I curled up on a thrifted mattress and tried to convince myself that survival was enough. Those first weeks blurred together, job interviews, Craigslist ads, waiting in long lines for groceries. I sold what little jewelry I'd brought, watched my checking account drain to the last few dollars, and negotiated with myself over every small expense. It was humbling and sometimes humiliating. Carrying my growing body across the city for temp work, carefully rationing food so I could get prenatal vitamins, learning which bus routes stopped nearest the free health clinic. Through it all, a kind of numbness settled over me. I became methodical, moving from one practical problem to the next. Need a job to pay the rent, apply everywhere. Can't afford new clothes for maternity wear. Patch up old jeans, borrow from a resale shop, accept hand-me-downs from wherever I could. Sometimes I'd find myself standing at a busy intersection, racing heartbeat hammering in my chest, as if waiting for my old life to catch up and sweep me back to where I belonged. But there was no going back. I didn't really let myself grieve, not in any sort of organized way. My emotions would hit in waves: anger at Margaret and Lisa for what they'd done, sorrow for the husband I thought I knew, then a steely determination that I would not let this be my whole story. And beneath all of it, the murmur of hope every time I felt a flutter inside my belly. I remember sitting hunched in my tiny kitchen, my hands spread over the rise of life just beneath my ribs, whispering, "I promise I'll figure this out for you. I promise you won't inherit my failures." Work, in whatever form I could find it, became salvation as much as necessity. I started with bakery shifts at a local grocery store, learning to roll dough and pipe icing until my hands ached and my feet felt like blocks of wood by closing time. Carol, the night supervisor, took to me in her own brusque way, showing me shortcuts and slyly adding day-old pastries to my bag for the baby. When she discovered I'd grown up in a bookstore, she started sending me home with battered recipe books or copies of gourmet magazine nobody else wanted. That tiny spark of familiarity, words arranging themselves in comforting patterns on a page, made the world feel less alien. On the side, I picked up any temp office work I could get. Sometimes this meant answering phones in a real estate office. Other days, it was data entry in a windowless back room at a call center. The money wasn't much, and the instability was nerve-wracking. I learned to stretch every dollar, to say yes to any overtime, to go without rather than ask for help. The discipline I'd learned as a girl, helping my parents budget for bookstore slow seasons, tracking inventory, smiling at difficult customers, became invisible armor. But not every day was heroic. There were mornings when I could barely lift myself out of bed, paralyzed by an ache that was both physical and emotional. Pregnancy was lonelier than I'd imagined. No Daniel reading baby books beside me. No mother-in-law crocheting soft blankets or cooing over ultrasound photos. Sometimes I could barely look at myself in the mirror, afraid I would see not a mother in waiting, but a woman branded by loss, tainted by other people's suspicions. And yet, even in my lowest moments, I found help from unexpected places. The neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Lopez, appeared at my door one afternoon with a battered sewing kit and a plate of tamales, as if she'd been waiting for someone to need her kindness. She spoke little English and I little Spanish, but kindness is its own language. She showed me how to let out a seam, how to patch the knees in old jeans, how to make rice pudding that felt like forgiveness itself on a cold night. At the free clinic, a nurse named Judy started scheduling my appointments during her shifts, slipping extra prenatal vitamins into my palm. "You're stronger than you think," she'd whisper, squeezing my shoulder. I clung to that, wearing her encouragement like a shield on the days I felt most invisible. Slowly, sluggishly, the winter gave way to spring, and with it, new possibilities. My belly grew rounder. People began to offer me seats on the bus. Sometimes strangers asked about the baby, with genuine interest, not prying suspicion. Carol, ever practical, suggested I look into culinary classes. "You've got a knack for it, honey. People pay good money for good bread." I laughed her off, but the idea lodged in my mind. I started saving, small amounts at first, tips in loose change, scavenged from couch cushions. I put my name down for a low-cost business class at the local community college, terrified and exhilarated at the thought of learning anything new again. I attended class in the evenings, wide-eyed and exhausted, scribbling notes while my tired feet pressed grooves into the worn carpet. My son Jamie arrived on the cusp of summer, in a small delivery room overlooking the city skyline. The labor was long and messy, punctuated by worry that I wouldn't be enough for him, that somehow Daniel's family's accusations would seep into him and mark him too. But then, the nurses laid that tiny, perfect boy on my chest, and the world shrank to the pulse beneath his fragile ribs, the look of fierce wanting in his hungry eyes. I was no longer just Emily, the lost wife. I was Jamie's mother, and that new identity was more powerful than any shame I carried. Those next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. No family came to visit, no bouquets filled my room, but Carol brought croissants, and Mrs. Lopez left flowers outside the door. Judy from the clinic stopped by to check on Jamie's weight, to make sure I was eating and sleeping at least a little. The community I hadn't known I was building had begun to hold me up. I learned to juggle 2 jobs, late-night diaper changes, and coursework. If sleep was a luxury, pride was my fuel. I watched other mothers at the playground, their easy laughter, their strollers lined up in neat ranks, their gold rings flashing in the sun, and sometimes I ached to be one of them. But then Jamie would clutch my finger or giggle at my silly faces, and life felt good enough, honest enough. Over time, the rhythm of survival became the rhythm of living. I experimented in my cramped kitchen, baking muffins and cinnamon rolls, testing recipes from Carol's hand-me-down magazines. Free samples at the bakery proved wildly popular with customers. Soon, Carol and I began to scheme. What if we pitched a specialty line to the store manager? What if I started my own stall at the Saturday market? For the first time in ages, I allowed myself to imagine something bigger than getting through the week. Jamie was growing, healthy and bright-eyed. My grades in business classes were steady, and I'd found a knack for marketing that surprised even me. I began sketching logos and menu ideas during quiet shifts, waking early to research equipment, licensing requirements, bakery trends. I started small. I invested my savings into a stand at the Saturday farmers market, a folding table, a makeshift sign, Carol's old pastry bags filled with cookies and bread. Business was slow at first, but people came back for more, drawn by the buttery smells and, maybe, the shy hope in my voice when I told them I'd baked everything myself. Mrs. Lopez brought her friends, Judy stopped by with her family, and soon my stand gained regulars. With each success, no matter how modest, I felt the weight of Millfield's shame begin to slide away from me. I was building something new, something that belonged to Jamie and me alone, something no accusation could take from us. I won't pretend there weren't setbacks. There were days when the car broke down and I couldn't make deliveries, times when Jamie spiked a fever and I missed too many classes, or when the bakery's pipes froze and we lost an entire week's income. But I'd learned that falling didn't mean failing, not anymore. Each setback was a lesson in resilience, a reason to innovate, or a chance to lean on the friends I'd made with my honesty and stubbornness. 2 years passed like this. Grueling, beautiful, ordinary. The market stand grew into a small storefront on a corner near the park, painted pale blue with a hand-lettered sign, Jamie's Bakery. A picture of a smiling boy hugging a loaf of bread hung in the window. I hired other single moms, made cakes for neighborhood birthdays, sponsored local school events. My life was busy, loud, and so gloriously full that some days I stood in the doorway before opening, the early sunlight streaming in, and whispered a thank you to whatever force had seen me through the hardest nights. I had remade myself from the ashes of heartbreak and exile. I was strong, capable, a mother, a business owner, a friend. Sometimes a customer would mention they used to live out near Millfield, and a chill would pass through me, but I'd smile, ring up their order, and remind myself Millfield didn't define me. The opinions of Margaret, Lisa, even Daniel, those belonged to a past self I no longer needed to please. What mattered now was this place, built by my own hands, the people who showed up for me as I'd learned to show up for them. Most of all, the little boy with brown eyes and a gap-toothed grin, who never questioned whether his mom was enough. Rising from rock bottom wasn't triumphant or easy, or any of the things I might have dreamed as a girl. It was slow, daily, a million choices to keep going, to forgive, to build, but it was real. And for the first time in my life, I truly belonged to myself. Returning to Millfield with a new status 7 years can change a place. Or maybe, I mused as I crested the final gentle hill outside Millfield, 7 years can change a person so completely that the place looks different, even when it's hardly changed at all. I hadn't driven down this particular stretch of Route 9 in ages, but every turn seemed tattooed in memory. The skinny silver maples, the hand-painted water tower, the crumbling sign where Main Street split off from the highway. It was early autumn, just as it was the day I'd been cast out. The air smelled of apples and wood smoke. Fields stretched golden in the low sunlight. And yet, the world felt wider, less like a cage. Jamie, now 6, sat beside me in the passenger seat, knees drawn up and eyes darting between his comic book and the window. He didn't remember Millfield. My stories about small-town festivals and Ohio snowfalls were fairy tales to him. "Is this really where you grew up, Mom?" he asked, wriggling in his booster. I nodded, trying to smile, though a river of nerves ran through me. "You'll see," I promised. "This place has its own kind of magic." Coming back wasn't an impulse. The decision had simmered for years, since the moment my bakery in Columbus became more than survival, when it started to carry the hum of something solid, hopeful, successful. I'd opened a second shop, then partnered with a friend to launch a wholesale line. My calendar filled with catering orders, my books balanced with a satisfying surplus. No part of this journey had been undemanding, but each year, the sting of my exile dulled into something almost tender. My bakery had always been about healing, feeding the body, yes, but also offering a slice of warmth where it was needed most. At some point, that mission began to extend beyond Columbus. I wanted to give something back to the place that, for all its scars, shaped the best and bravest parts of me. When the news reached me that the old Mason Hardware building, once the pride of Daniel's family, was up for sale at a bank auction, my heart leapt and clenched at once. For days, I debated. Was returning an act of pride or of pettiness? Did I want revenge, closure, or simply to lay down my own roots on ground that once rejected me? In the end, it wasn't about them. It was about showing Jamie and myself that we didn't have to stay away from the places that hurt us. Sometimes, the only way to heal was to return, whole and unashamed. And so, after a blur of paperwork, quiet lawyers, and one sleepless night before the bidding, I became the new owner of 214 Main Street, the most recognizable building for miles. I kept the news to myself, savoring it, tucking it close like the secret ingredient in my best cinnamon rolls, until all the dots were signed and the keys jingled in my palm. The day Jamie and I drove into town, most of the storefronts looked unchanged. The same dusty windows, the striped awnings I remembered from my walks as a teenager, the diner with its neon sign, perpetually promising pie. For a moment, I was a child again, trailing behind my mother through the Saturday market, Nathan from social studies, waving from his bike, Mrs. Peterson's golden retriever tied out front of the barber shop. Yet, beneath the nostalgic hush was another feeling, one of power, of measured anticipation. I was not the same girl who left here broken. We parked in front of the building's big blank windows, me stepping out first and stretching tight muscles. Jamie trailed after me, peering at the battered "sold" stickers, still flapping in the breeze. "This one?" he asked, eyes wide. I nodded and handed him the keys. "Go ahead, champ. Let's see what's inside." As he worked at the stiff lock, I drifted a few paces back, letting the memories surge and ebb. The echo of Daniel's laughter, the smell of paint from a teenage summer spent helping out, the clanging of tools on the back bench. For a moment, I clenched the sleeves of my coat, heart thudding. I let myself feel it, the loss, but also the aliveness of return. Then exhaled, setting the past aside like a heavy box on a forgotten shelf. The interior of the shop felt haunted by better times, or maybe just by what could have been. Dust motes floated in beams of afternoon sun. Shelves stood half empty, and a pile of old, unpaid invoices littered the office desk where I'd once sat, awkward and eager during family meetings. Jamie ran from room to room, delighted by his own echo, inventing games out of stacked boxes. "Can we paint the walls blue?" he asked, as if it had always belonged to us. "Yes," I replied. "We can do whatever we want. This is our place now." Word spread fast in Millfield. The next morning, when I stopped in at the grocery store, the manager blinked at my new name on the credit card. And later that week, someone left a loaf of homemade bread on my windowsill. There was curiosity, of course. A few outright stares on the sidewalk, whispers in the post office lobby. Some faces I recognized. Old high school classmates, my former Sunday school teacher, friends who'd gone silent in the wake of scandal. Most were cautiously polite. "Didn't expect to see you back, Emily." But I caught a note of something else beneath their greetings. Was it admiration? Guilt? Surprise? I wasn't sure. It didn't matter as much as I once thought. I walked Jamie by Turner's Books and Gifts, my parents' old shop. It was under new ownership now, but the familiar striped awning was still there, and the fragrance of paper and coffee drifted out the front door. I hesitated, hand lingering on the glass, but decided against going inside. Some memories needed time. They weren't souvenirs to be revisited in a rush. I began the slow work of renovation, not just hiring contractors to repair the shop's weathered floors and faded paint, but piecing together a vision for what the space could be. I saw not a hardware store, but a bright bakery and cafe, a place for children to tumble in after school, for neighbors to linger over coffee, for memories to be remade. Jamie scribbled ideas in his notebook, a mural with balloons and sunflowers, shelves lined with books and board games. Each day, our new life unfurled little by little, paint splattered and full of possibility. One afternoon, as I was measuring for shelves, I heard cautious footsteps behind me. I turned to see Sarah Whitaker, a classmate, once a vague acquaintance, standing awkwardly by the door. She offered a tentative smile and a tray of lemon bars. "I heard you were back," she said, "and I wanted to say welcome." There was no mention of the past, no drawn-out apology, just kindness. I thanked her, and we talked for half an hour, as if nothing had ever separated us. Encounters with others were more complicated. Mr. Willis from the bank shook my hand, careful to mention how some folks always believed in you. Mrs. Ellis, my old English teacher, pressed my arm at the pharmacy and murmured, "You turned out just fine, dear." But not everyone reached out. Some crossed the street to avoid me, or glanced quickly away when we made eye contact. The Mason family, I later learned, had sold the last of their assets to pay off debts. Daniel himself was gone, moved downstate with a new job. His parents retired to a cousin's farm. Lisa, rumor had it, divorced and nursing her own wounds. Our trajectories had pulled apart so thoroughly, it felt strange to realize we'd ever shared the same small orbit. Despite the occasional pang, walking past the church where we'd married, or the park where Daniel proposed, I found an unexpected sense of peace. Millfield, for all its wounds, was simply a place now, not a verdict. Any power it held over me was mine to reclaim or to let go. Renovating the shop became therapy. We painted walls with colors that made sunlight dance. I consulted with local artisans, hired neighbors, accepted Jamie's suggestions with pride. I put up flyers advertising for help, especially for single moms or women needing a fresh start, just as I once had. Within weeks, a team formed. Chloe, with her boisterous laugh and pastry skills. Maria, who could balance orders and soothe crying babies in the same breath. A rotating cast of teens saving for college. Our laughter filled the space as we worked late into the night. The old building gradually transformed by determination and joy. When we opened Turner and Son Bakery, the name a last-minute edit from Jamie's giggly suggestion, a crowd gathered. People lined up for chocolate chip scones, honey-drizzled cornbread, and lemon tarts as bright as hope itself. Jamie handed out samples. I smiled until my face ached. It was just a bakery, and yet it felt bigger. The restoration of something inside me, as much as bricks and mortar. In those first weeks, business was brisk. Mothers and children filled the booths after school. Old-timers nursed coffee at the counter. Teenagers traded stories over milkshakes. I made birthday cakes, sponsored the local soccer team, hosted free baking classes for kids on Saturday mornings. The shop became more than a business. It was a gathering place, a gentle, daily rebuttal to the isolation I once felt. Sometimes, late at night, when Jamie was asleep and the ovens cooled, I'd lock up and stand by the front window, watching the quiet town. The weight of anxiety diminished, replaced by gratitude for each small mercy, each second chance, each friend who chose kindness over memory. A few times, old ghosts brushed past. I saw Margaret Mason at the grocery store one morning, silver hair fallen across her cheek. She glanced at me, all pride gone from her shoulders. Our eyes met, just for a second, a strange echo of pain and aging hurt, and then she turned away, basket clutched tight. I felt no joy in her mortification, only a faint sadness, as if mourning what might have been. Millfield's rumors swirled as always, but the story of my shame had been eclipsed by another story, the one I was living now, with Jamie, with my quirky staff, with friends new and old. Whenever doubt prickled, I reminded myself that survival wasn't enough if you lost yourself along the way. Here, I'd found a place to belong, not because I fit old expectations, but because I'd built something worth belonging to. Some evenings, Jamie and I would walk the quiet streets together, kicking stones, breathing in the sweet scent of fresh-cut grass or fallen leaves. He'd ask for stories about my own childhood, about the bookstore, about the festivals, and the ice skating pond. And I'd share what I remembered, honest and hopeful in equal measure. Coming back had never been about winning. It was about reclaiming my story, unafraid and unbent. It was about raising my son in a place woven with both shadows and light. It was about proving, first to myself, that you can outgrow the judgments that nearly break you and find your way home on your own terms. Above the bakery door, Alongside the hours in our menu, I posted a small sign. Every sunrise is a second chance. Millfield gave me both, a place to fall and a place to rise again. And standing in the heart of my hometown, I knew I'd finally come full circle. Not the same, but whole, facing my accusers and reclaiming justice. Sometimes justice demands a courtroom, but most of the time, it happens in quieter, messier places. At a sunlit kitchen table, in a crowded town meeting, across the street, when old enemies finally meet your eyes. For 7 years, I carried the wound of what was done to me. It wasn't just the facts of the accusation. Money missing, numbers not lining up, voices I'd trusted turning cold and hard. It was the deeper scar, the way I was reduced to a rumor. My story told for me, my name twisted to fit somebody else's version of the truth. I rebuilt my life in Columbus and brought it back to Millfield, sure. I opened the doors to Turner & Son Bakery with Jamie at my side, drawing a new map for myself and my son. But I always knew there'd come a day when I'd have to cross more than a town border. I would have to look the past in the face. I didn't come home hungry for drama or vengeance. I wanted the records set straight. If not for everyone, then at least for myself, for Jamie, and for those who might one day be caught in similar shadows. The opportunity presented itself in the way unspectacular things often do. A pile of boxes in my storeroom, half-unpacked donations from neighbors for our new cafe's community library. Digging through the jumble, one chilly March morning, I found a yellowed folder wedged between battered cookbooks. Its label, Mason Hardware, 2018 Financials, made my heart stutter. I thumbed it open. Inside, a mess of invoices, bank transaction slips, register tapes, dusty with disuse, but shockingly familiar in their significance. There, among them, was a receipt from a day I could recall with sickening clarity. One where I'd supposedly closed the till hundreds of dollars short, except this slip, printed with a different time stamp than the Mason family ever admitted, showed a late-night refund Daniel himself had processed after I'd gone home. Others documented Lisa's frequent drawer corrections, explanations scribbled in shorthand only she used. My pulse fluttered. Back then, this evidence would have exonerated me if anyone had bothered to look. For a moment, anger threatened to unmoor me. I relived every night of doubt, every maybe I did forget that had haunted me. My hands shook, not just with old humiliation, but with the wild realization that I held truth in my grasp, irrefutable now, but so profoundly overdue. I made careful copies, storing the originals back in the folder as gently as if it were the blueprint to my soul. The next question was, what now? I spent nights after closing, weighed down by possibilities, public confrontation, letters to the town paper, maybe even a lawyer. But in the end, I decided justice, real justice, wasn't about humiliation or spectacle. I wanted honesty and acknowledgement, not revenge, and I wanted to do it face to face. By this point, Millfield had accepted me back with a mixture of enthusiasm and wary curiosity. Turner & Son Bakery was more than a business. It was a landmark of resilience, a place where people gathered, shared news, healed with cookies and coffee. Word spread quickly that old wounds were about to be addressed. It began quietly. I invited Margaret, Daniel's mother, to the bakery under the pretense of discussing a community fundraiser. She arrived, smaller than I remembered, her hair a soft, defeated gray, rather than the iron helmet of my memories. Her hands fidgeted with her coat as she scanned the warm interior, the chalkboard menu, Jamie's artwork, the bustle of employees she didn't recognize. I led her to a quiet corner table. "Thank you for coming, Margaret," I said gently, sliding the folder before her. "Before we talk about the present, I need to ask something about the past." She looked ready to bristle, then saw the papers. Her face paled. She lifted the top sheet, her lips pressing tight as her eyes darted over the familiar printouts, the bank slips, the inked margins. I watched a spectrum of emotions pass across her face. Surprise, then disbelief, then something like reluctant recognition. After a long silence, she looked up at me. Her gaze was clouded by something I hadn't expected. Pain. "You kept all of this?" Her voice shook. "I found them here, in a box. But yes, I kept every copy I could, and I remembered what I lived." I steadied my voice. "I'm not doing this to shame you, Margaret, but I deserve for the truth to be known." We sat with it a while, her nervously shuffling paper, me watching the clock tick. Finally, she whispered, "After you left, things got difficult. The books never balanced. The hardware store went under. Tom passed away last winter. I lost almost everything." Her words trailed off. "I'm sorry for those losses," I said quietly, truthfully. I could see her regret, but also the private struggle to let go of old pride. I added gently, "But you know, don't you, that I never took a cent, that the accusations weren't just wrong. They broke things I can't get back." She nodded, tears springing up. I was afraid to question my children. The store was slipping, and I couldn't bear more change. I let Lisa blame you, and I let myself believe it was easier to lose you than to see what was really happening. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was the closest Margaret would ever come. And in that moment, it was enough. A curtain lifted between us. She, frail and regretful. Me, bruised, but steadfast. We sat in silence, the words neither of us had ever said, resting between us like a shared sorrow. But there was still Daniel. Finding him was harder. He'd moved, friends told me, after selling the family's last assets. Gone downstate, as small towns like to say, taking a job that kept him away most weeks. Eventually, after several phone calls and a letter sent to his new address, he agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our towns. Older, heavier, his smile tentative. Daniel seemed surprised by how little anger I showed, but perhaps by then my anger had burned itself out, replaced by something calmer and steadier. He listened as I laid out the documents, the till logs, the slips in Lisa's handwriting, the final bank sheets showing, clear as a bell, that the money problems had come long before the day I was told to pack my bags. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let my wounds show. I simply let the facts speak. For a while, Daniel said nothing. Finally, staring at his hands, he choked out, "I'm sorry." The words were rough and raw, as if torn from deep inside. I should have believed you. I was scared. I let Mom and Lisa set the story. I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting the business, protecting my family. Then, softer, I didn't protect you. I failed you. I didn't soften for him. You failed us both, I said, meeting his gaze with level honesty. But I forgive you, Daniel. I forgave you the day Jamie was born, because I couldn't let bitterness define the kind of mother I wanted to be. But I need you to know how much it cost me, how much I rebuilt, one stone at a time after you let me fall. He nodded. There was nothing else to say. Not really. Our chapters together were closed, and though regret lingered, I carried no wish to reopen old wounds. Word of these meetings drifted through Millfield. At first, there was a flurry of speculation. Was I threatening a lawsuit? Was I about to demand public apologies, money, some dramatic reckoning? Instead, the reality was quieter. I simply kept moving forward, telling my truth when asked, always with the evidence to back it up. Lisa never contacted me directly, but I heard she'd faced her own harsh reckonings. Family destroyed, marriage failed. She worked now in the city, far from the orbit where her word alone could ruin a life. There were no showdowns, only the echo of choices and the quiet balancing out of fortunes. What did change, most powerfully, was how Millfield itself viewed my story. Rumors slowly faded. Customers at the bakery stopped asking tentative, leading questions about those difficult years. Parents brought their children for cookies and advice. Single mothers stopped me on Main Street to share stories of starting over. I became, in a way I never wanted, but learned to treasure, a beacon for those who knew what it meant to stand accused and yet refuse to be defined by the worst thing anyone ever said about them. I found myself invited to panels at the community center, writing for the local paper about resilience in small business, teaching Jamie's classmates that sometimes justice takes time, and that the best revenge isn't victory over your enemies, but the quiet, daily practice of living with dignity. Some nights, cleaning up after the last customer, I'd catch my own reflection in the bakery window, small but unbowed, surrounded by light. I'd think how justice, like forgiveness, is never really finished. My past was part of me, the wounds, the lessons, the grit, but I had reclaimed my name. Jamie grew up proud of his mother, proud of his roots, proud of his own capacity for empathy and strength. At last, I was able to look at Margaret and Daniel, and even Lisa, if only in memory, without fear. I didn't need their remorse to validate who I'd become. Still, I knew it mattered, quietly but deeply, that somewhere in the records of Millfield, in ledgers and whispered stories alike, the truth would finally outrank the lies. Justice lingered in small things, an acknowledgement, a hand squeezed in apology, a page turned in the town's collective history. For me, justice wasn't loud or dramatic, but real, and it echoed through every choice I made when I walked down Main Street holding my son's hand, no longer the accused, but the author of my own story. 7. Closing the past, opening a new future. Sometimes I find myself standing by the bakery window, just before dawn, a mug of coffee cradled in my hands, and I marvel at the quiet. There's a golden hush that falls over Millfield in the early hours, long before the town wakes, before Jamie tumbles down the stairs for breakfast, before the day's business and bustle begin. In that blue-gray silence, I glimpse the outlines of both my old life and the one I am still building. I breathe in, and for the first time in years, the breath comes, easy, after so many seasons spent fighting ghosts, of injustice, of sorrow, of the girl I had been. I'm surprised by how simply the act of moving forward can feel. The past lives with me, yes. It's woven through everything, the way I fold dough in the bakery's kitchen, the patient way I listen to a child's mispronounced order, the notes I jot in the margins of my ledgers. But it no longer defines me, no longer shadows every joy with doubt. Somewhere along the way, forgiveness, slow, stubborn, unexpected, settled softly in my chest. It was not the forgiveness you offer for someone else's sake. Margaret's regrets, Daniel's fraught apologies, even Lisa's distant silence, none of it could have freed me if I hadn't first learned to hold myself with kindness. I had to let go of the version of myself that was always searching for permission to belong, always measuring her worth by other people's acceptance. I grieved the earlier Emily, the one who wanted so desperately to be loved by her husband's family, to be invisible in her mistakes, to exist without drawing ire or suspicion. I let her rest, and in her place, I welcomed a woman unafraid to be seen, as flawed, as resilient, as entirely, audaciously herself. Jamie, with his gap-toothed smile and endless curiosity, is the truest evidence of how life can flower even from the rockiest soil. Sitting at the kitchen table late at night, helping him with school projects or soothing him after a nightmare, I feel a thread binding us, one spun not from perfection, but from hard-won safety and absolute love. He asks more questions now about his father, about why we left and why we came back. I answer as honestly as I can, mindful that the truth is not a weapon, but a bridge. I want him to know that even the most painful chapters of our lives can become the ground from which hope grows. The bakery, too, has become something larger than I imagined, a kind of living testament to redemption and fresh beginnings. There are days when our little shop is so crowded that laughter spills out onto the sidewalk. The team I've built feels like family. Chloe and her corny jokes, Maria's quiet wisdom, the teenagers who save tips for college but linger after hours to hear stories from my college days in Columbus. We bake, we bicker, and we build each other up in small, honest ways. Every Saturday, Jamie and I host baking classes for kids, and it fills me with joy to see them, aprons askew, faces smeared with chocolate, learning the delight of creation instead of fear of mistakes. And yet, it's not all happiness every day. There are slow afternoons in broken ovens, rain leaking through the roof, bills that stack up when the delivery van sputters out. I get tired. I snap at Jamie. I worry over the numbers late into the night, or grieve old losses when some small thing, a familiar cologne on a customer, a song on the radio, catches me by surprise. But I weather these moments, carrying the knowledge that survival is not a singular achievement, but a decision renewed daily to get up, to try again, to believe in another sunrise. Over time, some of the sharpest memories have softened. Margaret and I sometimes cross paths at the grocery store. She nods, a small, dignified gesture that means, I remember, and I see you now. Daniel, from time to time, sends cards for Jamie's birthdays. His words are simple, but reading them, I sense he, too, is learning to live with the consequences of lost innocence. Millfield's gossip cycle has turned its attention elsewhere. The bakery is not Emily the accused's. It is Jamie's mom's place, the spot with the good cinnamon rolls, the safe space for newcomers to town. In those rare, unguarded moments when I reflect on my journey, I try not to romanticize the hardship. There was nothing noble about the loneliness, the hunger, the ways I doubted my own sanity. But I no longer drown in anger or clutch the old wounds as proof of what was owed to me. Instead, I am learning, slowly, messily, to harvest what the pain made possible. It made me resourceful. It taught me to listen for truth beneath the noise. It taught me to ask for help, to become both gentler and braver. Forgiveness, I've found, is not forgetting. I have not, and will not, erase the history of what happened to me, nor the cost of being cast out by people I once counted as family. But I can tell my story now without flinching. Sometimes I volunteer at the local women's shelter, sharing my experiences with those still trapped in cycles of blame or self-doubt. Sometimes I speak at the library or for the high school's entrepreneurship class, describing the winding, imperfect path from shame to self-sufficiency. My story is not a warning, but a map, proof that even the deepest betrayal can be survived, and even the most stubborn rumor can run out of breath. Perhaps the biggest change is this: I allow myself to dream again. Not the fragile, secret dreams of my girlhood, but bold ones. For new recipes, for expanding the bakery, for summer vacations by the lake with Jamie. I plan to travel, to show my son the ocean. I joke with Chloe about opening a second bakery in the next county. For each day spent haunted by scarcity, I imagine months of plenty, of friendships forged across flour-dusted counters, of celebrations and new beginnings under bright cafe lights. The future no longer frightens me, nor does the prospect of another fall. I know what I am capable of. I know adversity when she knocks at my door, and I know the strength it takes to let her pass through without stealing the hearth's warmth or the heart's hope. On anniversaries of the bakery's reopening, Jamie and I bake an elaborate cake and share it with the neighborhood. It's a ritual, a reminder. We honor not just the easy days, but the rain-soaked ones, too. We place extra chairs at the table, invite in those who wander by, hungry or lost, and make space for their stories. Turner and Son is, beneath all its cinnamon and clatter, a house of belonging. Some evenings, Jamie curls in my lap and asks, "Are you happy, Mom?" His gaze is so earnest, so free of the shadows I once feared he'd carry. I always answer the same way. I am, especially right now, because I am happy, not in the untroubled storybook way, but in a deeper, heartier sense. I am free. I am not defined by who left or who hurt me, by what others wrote in my stead, or by old wounds that once seemed the boundaries of my world. Now, the horizon is wider than the town's edge. My life, and Jamie's, are marked not by suspicion, but by possibility. There will be more obstacles, no doubt. The past is never gone, only quieter. But I choose, every morning, to let it rest, and to turn my face toward whatever light the day offers. So here, in this blue-painted building, with laughter echoing down polished floors, I close the old chapter. I hold gratitude for every hard lesson, every unexpected hand reaching out, every sign that redemption is stranger and sweeter than the stories we once lived by. I raise my head, stand alongside friends, old and new, and lead my son by the hand into tomorrow and every day that follows. There is nothing left to prove. The past is at last only that. A page filed, a scar healed, a story I survived well enough to keep writing. If Millfield has given me anything, it is this: the conviction that home is not a place of perfect memories, but the ground beneath your feet when you choose to begin again. And so, as dawn slides golden through the bakery windows, I step forward. My heart is full, not just of forgiveness, but of hope. Every sunrise is a second chance, and we are ready for all the mornings still to come.